Bom, boa tarde a todos. Eu sou Luiz Horta, um dos coordenadores do BIOEN. Eu estou iniciando em português, porque grande parte da nossa audiência tem sido em português, mas temos também muitas pessoas de outros países e, por isso, daqui para frente, eu vou falar inglês e a presença de vocês é muito bem-vinda. Muito obrigado. I am Luiz Horta from BIOEN, the Bioenergy Program of FAPESP, and we are starting our second webinar. Sorry for this small delay, we have some technical issues, but we are starting a really interesting webinar today. It's good to have you with us to hear from three very distinguished researchers considering the opportunities and the challenges on biotechnology development, the frontiers and the difficulties that they are solving and they are considering in this scenario. We are also operating in YouTube, and you can send some questions and some remarks using this resource. So I think that to save time, I will go directly to the introduction from our scientific director, Luis Eugenio Melo, and then we will enter in our main activity. Please, Professor Melo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Luiz Horta. It's my great pleasure to be here at this opening session of the second webinar of BIOEN, this fascinating program that is carried on by FAPESP. It has achieved very important goals already. We have the pleasure to have in our panel distinguished guests from both Brazilian institutions as well as foreign institutions. Bioenergy, by all means, is the future as we all see it, and the sustainability of bioenergy production, refinery, and so on. It's a critical step which has a number of technical aspects which I hope to learn more in this webinar. With this, and to be short, I conclude my welcoming you to this event and give back the word to you, Luiz Horta.
Glaucia Mendes, our leading coordinator of BIOEN, to introduce you some aspects of what we are doing in BIOEN and what we'll do shortly in the BIBEST. I'm sure that she will mention to you these points. Please, Glaucia.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the second BIOEN research webinar. The idea of this webinar series is to discuss the latest results and achievements of the program on all its divisions. We had a first one on biomass, now Biofuels Technologies, biorefineries, end-use engines and aviation applications, and sustainability. So we have plans to cover all the most recent achievements and successes of the program. I'd like to start by giving our sincere thanks to Professor Luis Eugenio for the support of our FAPESP BIOEN activities, Professor Lilind, Bonomi, and Rubens for accepting our invitation to speak and other to moderate. Overall, we have more than 1,300 publications on the BIOEN program, so it's a great challenge to be here speaking about any number of them. A lot of different aspects are covered in the program. We have 419 projects conducted by 700 students and postdocs in collaboration with 13 large companies and 188 startup companies. On the last webinar, we described, I invite you to see it on YouTube, but we described aspects from biomass technologies, including agronomy, biotechnology, breeding. We discussed the sequencing of the sugarcane genome by Brazilian groups. It's the most complex crop to be sequenced to date. We covered statistical genetics that open many doors for breeding. We have now super canes coming with over 200 tons per hectare of yields. We have disease-free seeds from bacteria that plague the industry. We have sugarcane transgenics. And more recently, we see a surge of research on artificial intelligence in the mills and in fields, digital agriculture. So quite a lot of results on the biomass front. And today we're gonna talk about biofuels technologies. We're gonna see new results on conventional biofuels, and a lot on advanced biofuels coming, but I'll start to pinpoint some of interesting results on conventional improvement. Because one can think that conventional biofuels are already so efficient that there is not a lot to be done on it, but it's quite the contrary. I learned that BIOEN researchers made it even better. We have now fermentation automation with temperature control that improved yields, new solvents, less aggressive to the environment. In the front of anhydrous ethanol production, a lot of energetic and economic gains. One example of innovation is on molecular sieves. We have one of the main authors of this front here, Professor Rubens Maciel. It allows us to have residues removed that can open markets to new countries, to other countries where we did not explore to initially. And we have a reduction in energy consumption of around 20% that can be achieved in parallel with a reduction of more than 20 times of water consumption. I think the industry is would acknowledge this as a strong impact. Reduction of energy and water use is great for our sustainability plans. We have new uses for vinasse. We can now transform vinasse into oil. So it's a very interesting development. We have gains in the advanced biofuels front. We have gains in saccharification, new knowledge on enzymes for many biomass products, not only biofuels. It expands into other uses, such as in the food industry, new enzyme cocktails. And we're gonna have a webinar destined to discuss biorefineries, but it's amazing. We can have bio-oils from different feedstocks, examples of this, biobutanol processing, new building blocks from to produce bio-based chemicals, new uses for lignin, ETB, green PETs, and nanocellulose. So all of this just to give you a hint of what we expect to be presenting, to give the opportunity for bioenergy researchers to present in our next webinars. And also, I would like, as Orta mentioned, to announce the Brazilian Bioenergy Science and Technology Conference. It's going to happen from 30th of November to December 2nd, completely virtual. We're going to have the opportunity for poster presentation in a digital form with a video, technical sessions, and a brief policy brief. And next year, May 24 to 26, a hybrid conference. So expect to hear a lot from us. We are very glad and welcome you all to follow our achievements. Thank you, Horta, back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Laura, for this interesting introduction about the very broad field of bioenergy. But today we are focusing mainly the production of biofuel and the sustainability aspects and integration aspects with very interesting three presentations. Interconnected, the three researchers will start with an appraisal about the process that they are today in development, are maturing in bench or already in some pilot plants. Secondly, we are going to see the integration aspects on this, and then we are see what can be considered the advanced second generation. So stay with us. We have a really interesting presentation right now. To start, the first speaker, we will see my colleague, Rubens Maciel Filho. He is one of the coordinators of BIOEN, and he will introduce an overview of the global energy metrics, demands, and conversion technologies, considering exactly the bioenergy and the biofuels. Rubens is full professor at Chemical Engineering School in the Department of Chemical Process and coordinator of the Laboratory of Optimization, Design and Advanced Process Controls, and also head of the Laboratory of Innovation in Biofuels of Unicamp, all these activities in Unicamp. And he is also a coordinator of the Brazilian Institute of Biofabrication. He is a full member of the Academy of Sciences of the state of São Paulo. So to give you this first introduction about the variety of process to convert biomass in biofuels, the modern process, I invite Rubens to speak to us. Please, Rubens, the floor is yours. Is it open?
Hello.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's really a great pleasure to be with friends and with two very distinguished speakers. And then I would like to ask to do next transparency, please. Next slide, please. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about the need and what you have to think and how you have to think to improve use of biofuels. The first point that I would like to mention is poverty and pollution is not just destination. It's a matter of to take the right decision. And then I invite you to think with me how we can try to solve this problem. Then I would like to invite you to look at these two pictures on top of the slides. One of them, the right-hand side, they are produced by Bruce Day and Michigan State University. Then you can see in the x-axis the per capita primary energy consumption, and the y-axis the human development index. It is in fact a straight line. That means that the energy consumption and the human well-being are strictly linked. No countries have both high human development index and low energy use. So that means that we have to provide energy. We have to provide energy to everybody to develop. And then I invite you to look the countries that is just in the left-hand side of these curves, like India, mainland China, Brazil, and several other countries, that very large populated countries. They, in fact, they are using less than 1 kilowatt per person, whereas developed countries are using around 10, 20 to 50. That means that these developing countries, they have to have more energy to develop themselves. That's what you want. And then I asked one guy of my research group, Pablo Ortiz, to produce these two graphics on the bottom part of the slide, in which you can see the total energy consumption around the years with 7 countries to know: Russia, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, China, India, Nigeria, and South Africa. Why did I choose this? Because these countries altogether, they have 4 billion of people that are in this stage of use very few kilowatt per person. So that means that if these countries are going to develop more, they will need 10 times or 20 times more energy that they are using nowadays. And for the right-hand side, in both part of this slide, you can see the CO2 emissions from fuel combustion that is very much related to the total energy consumption of these countries. What this means? This means that most of this energy that is produced to consume comes from the fossil origin. That's in fact what's like, if you look to the International Energy Agency report for last year, 81% is from fossil. Only 19% comes from renewable energy, and most of them from hydroelectricity that is almost on top of the capacity. That means if you are to attend the several agreements to reduce CO2 emissions and to have a better environment for our planet, and at the same time to provide conditions for the countries in development to increase the standard of life, we need to have renewable energy. And among the several options of renewable energy, I would mention 3 of them, for instance: photovoltaic panels, wind powers, and biomass. Wind powers and the photovoltaic panels, they are intermittent, and then you would require the use of some device like very large batteries, for instance, to store the energy and deliver it when it's needed. Usually, for the sunshine, for instance, the sunshine profile does not the same coincidence with the usage profile. Then you have to find ways to stock this, to store this energy. And batteries are in fact used for this purpose, and lithium-air batteries appears to be a new technology that's come to have 2 uses. One of them is to mobility, and second one to the storage of this energy and to deliver when you need it. So wind power and photovoltaic panels, you need, in fact, to have a storage system together to provide energy when the profile is needed. The second point is, if you don't have renewable energy, and these countries are going to improve their needs for energy, then you need to use fossil fuels. Think about the price of the oil. Today is $45 for a barrel. If you need to increase it, this price is going to go up very fast. The third possibility to have as a possible renewable energies is biomass. And biomass is quite interesting. Why? Because the population, the human population, they need energy for use, they need energy for transportation, and they use energy for industry purpose. So, and they need also chemical products. And biomass appears to be the one solution that nowadays allows for the biorefinery concept. And then what you have to think, in fact, is one matrix concept in which you have wind power, photovoltaic panels, biomass, hydroelectricity, and of course the fossils that you intend to decrease, because you have to increase very much the demand the offer of the energy, because the demand for sure is going to increase if you want that 4 billion of people in this country, in this world, is going to have a better standard of life and the best environment for the planet. Next slide, please. So biomass is quite interesting, and as I mentioned, for the reason very mainly because you can stock it, so you can deliver as much as you want. You provide fuels in liquid form that is usual nowadays. That means you have high density of energy for use for transportation, and also you can produce electricity. What I'm talking about is the first generation process that you have in Brazil that's based on sugar extraction and fermentation. That sugar cane is our main feedstock for that. And then we have already the concept of biorefinery, in fact. When for the last 40 years, we could increase our planted area in terms of sugarcane 4 times, take this number, 4 times. And then we expanded production of ethanol as a fuel 33 times, more than 30 times. And the same amount of sugar, 30 times, just multiplied by 4 the planted area. This is the application of science and technology. And this provides us the knowledge to, for instance, improve the fermentation process for several ways: temperature control, extraction in situ, and work with the separation process as molecular sieves, set of columns, well-operated process control, several of them that allow us to use less sugarcane bagasse, to have an excess or of the sugarcane bagasse to go to produce electricity and to second generation ethanol. And also now, as a byproduct, in the past we used that was not usual, but we have now VAs and CO2 that in fact are valuable byproducts that may use as raw material for to produce chemicals. That makes the road of biomass very interesting because you have already the concept of, let's say, biorefinery that provides the society fuels, energy, and chemicals, and at the same time, for the business point of view, allows flexibility. And in terms of the business, when ethanol price is lower, you can increase the electricity production and make the same thing with sugar and another product that may come from vinasse, as was mentioned by Klaus in the beginning. We can produce oil, we can produce biomethane, with CO2, we can produce several chemicals. You can think that the third generation plants will have excess of electricity that you can export to the grid, and then with electricity and water, you have hydrogen, and you have CO2. And then some matter to use chemical process conversion to produce anything that you want. That is the general concept of the first generation. And then I put some possible ways from biomass to get to biofuels, heat, electricity, chemicals, and biomaterials. Pay attention that I will always try to put divisions that you have to have biofuels together, electricity and chemicals, and new materials, especially because the society needs all of them. You have a strong pressure on all parts of the world to reduce the CO2 emissions. If you are just thinking about biofuels, somebody else has to use oil, for instance, to produce plastics, to produce another chemicals that you need. So the ideas of biorefineries not only to provide flexibility in terms of economical business for the company, but also to provide to the society what the society needs. So the second generation of ethanol is hydrolysis of biomass. That's Professor Lee Lind is going to teach us later on some new advance. Is already being well established in Brazil with Raízen, for instance, and several very nice advances have been take place in the last years with enzyme cocktails, new ways to do the pre-treatment, how to use the fermentation, the C6 together the C5 that are then to use the lignin in one clever way to get new materials and so on. So that is the second generation that can be integrated with the first generation. And of course, Bonhomme is going to talk with us about the integration with corn. And that could be, for instance, one way to increase or to improve or to enlarge the production time of the first generation plants. The another route that we may have is thermochemical route. That is, as example, we have gasification, the second line just before, besides hydrolysis. Gasification allows you to, from biomass to syngas, and from syngas you can do to heat or electricity or biofuels through catalytic process. For instance, Fischer-Tropsch allows you to get hydrocarbons, but you don't need to go to hydrocarbons. Fischer-Tropsch is high pressure and the high temperature. You can go to alcohols with using more mild conditions, and you can produce electricity in a very efficient way together. The first generation, once you do the gasification of the biomass, that in this case is sugarcane bagasse, for instance. So many options from the thermochemical route using gasification. The other side is of thermochemical routes is to do with lower temperatures. You can do bio-oil, that is called pyrolysis. And again, we have two options. One of them is to do chemical conversion from bio-oil to biofuels or to electricity or chemicals, or you go to co-processing. Co-processing means that you can get this bio-oil put straight away in the refinery, reducing significantly the price or the investment in equipment, so reduce the capex. And then maybe it could be one solution that is easier to be implemented nowadays. The digestion that is just between gasification and pyrolysis, that's one very suitable application of the vinasse to produce biogas that's already on in several of these sugar plants. And the biomethane is quite interesting for several reasons, again, for chemicals, for fuels, for several applications. And I put the two last one, extraction and separation, because as Glaucian mentioned, several of these new crops are possible to already be very rich in some carbon-rich chains or some natural product plants that you can extract straight away and use it. Of course, this is not in commercial scale, some of them you are already using, but not for fuels. So that's one quite interesting area, and many advances have been allow us, including those ones that you can do molecular distillations. So several years ago, in early 80s, we have the several processes based on catalytic conversion of ethanol. We used to call this ethanol chemistry. And nowadays, with the advance of catalysts, we can return again to this scenario and work, for instance, for the catalytic conversion of ethanol to hydrocarbons, and then you can go to jet fuel. Another way is to use some of the process that we developed at Unicamp, for instance, that you don't need hydrogenation. In fact, that is one of the big point that you have to look at this discussion of mobility and the electricity and the use of liquid fuels. It appears that for the aviation sector, liquid plays a main role up to now. Then we have to replace this this jet fuel based on fossil on renewable jet fuel. The use of ethanol as hydrogen carrier is also quite interesting. That can be used for hydrogen propulsion cars, and in which you have, instead of feeding with hydrogen, you feed with ethanol. So the ethanol is a hydrogen driver. And then to complete the row of possibilities, using the vegetable oil to do the transesterification and esterification to biodiesel, several advances have been done in this direction, reducing the size of the plants, improving very much the efficiency of the process, and bring the biodiesel to be in very competitive price. So vegetable oil and bio oil, as I mentioned, can be in the sector of co-processing. And together with the syngas, you can go to from biomass to hydrocarbons and fermentation. This route to use the syngas from biomass to using fermentation is a quite challenging area, and you have worked in this area, and it's quite interesting because you can use also flue gas from several industries, and then you can use this CO2 that is otherwise is delivered to the environment as a feedstock for valuable products. So the concept of a biorefinery, we just want to have more products, but it brings flexibility in the business in case of risk of feedstock price fluctuation due to the intensive use, but mainly because you can provide renewable solutions to the population, to the worldwide population, as I mentioned to you. Don't forget the first slide. We have 4 billion of people in the states that they have to have more energy, more fuels, more chemicals to be used. Electricity for sure is going to play an important role. The forcing is forcing from 18 to 50 by year 2050, but even so, we have to work together in the concept of matrix of the fuels, matrix of the energy. Just to conclude, I'd like to do some final comments that society needs energy, society needs food, society needs chemicals, and society and the world needs to reduce the CO2 emissions. That means you have to go to renewable. Renewable has to be then a matrix in which we understand the photovoltaic panels, wind power, and mainly biomass as well developed can play a very, very important role. But a point is that I really want to make this point strong. Economic viability is essential. That means that we have to do science and technology to improve our process, to improve, to deliver what the society needs with reducing CO2. Why? Because the society in general is not prepared to pay more only because it is greener or because it's renewable. We have to be good enough to have efficiency in the process to provide to the society produce a competitive basis using renewable feedstock. It was a pleasure to be with you and a pleasure to listen to the 2 speakers, and I'm giving back the word to the moderator.
Okay, thank you so much, Rubens, for covering this very broad field of process and path to convert the biomass to final uses. And considering the variety of biomass we have, it seems that science and technology is developing today this amazing variety of process able to produce heat and power and mobility, and as you know, a variety of products. And it's interesting to explore a little bit more, then we are start to focus some opportunities. But before, should I remind you that you can make some questions for these distinguished speakers. You can use the the address is in the screen with the address that you can use to make some questions. Okay, BIOEN Webinars at FAPESP BR. Please don't hesitate. Send some questions. We'll be glad to receive your remark and opinion about that. So after this introduction about this variety of process, we are going now to hear Antonio Bonomi. He will introduce us some opportunities of integration, looking for synergies between different paths and opportunities. Let me introduce you briefly Antonio Bonomi. He is PhD in chemical engineering and senior research at the sustainability program of the Brazilian Biorenewables National Laboratory. Has worked for more than 40 years in the development and modeling and simulation of biofuels production process, having published more than 100 well-referenced papers. In fact, Antonio Bonomi, a good friend, is very active and he's with a nice team of people, young people, producing a lot of interesting studies. We will be honored here to hear from him what he's doing and these opportunities on integration. Please, Bonomi, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Horta. I will leave my camera open for you to see me. So I'm here really, but then I have to turn the camera off in order to improve your listening. So I hope now that you can listen me better. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation and the opportunity to present this speech in this webinar. And I wanted to have clear that we have a lot of connections with the previous talk about Professor Maciel. But as you see, the idea here now is to give a little bit different perspective in order to visualize how we can really produce or solve the integration and the production of biofuels in Brazil. And also, we think that can be important to build a global market. Okay, first of all, then look into the Brazilian energy transport matrix. You can say that Brazil has the cleanest fuel matrix for transport in use. And this position is supported, Professor Maciel already said that, by the ethanol production for light vehicles, where we are producing in Brazil more or less 50% of our consumption of fuel for light vehicles, and 12% of biodiesel for heavy vehicles. Also an important participation that we have to stand out at this point is the fact that biomass can also and is already used, largely used for electricity production, but that can be really improved in the next years, especially when we will talk and when we will define our integrations of production chains and feedstocks and processes for the biofuels production. Okay, of course, in Brazil, sugarcane is the most important feedstock for the biofuels production. And while for biodiesel, we are using mainly the soybeans, the oil to produce the biodiesel. But for the expansion, new feedstocks are being considered to be used for this for the expansion of the biodiesel production in the country. Now, finishing this introduction, I would like to say that the Brazilian NDC, National Determined Contribution, that was approved in Paris, one of the major focus of this Brazilian NDC is the expansion. Still, we are already the most important biofuel matrix in the world, but still we want to increase the focus of our NDC is to increase the production and use of biofuels. And for that, we understand that it's important that the country establish a national program for sustainable production and use of biofuels. And my first slide here will try to focus this point. So, first of all, let's say that integration is, of course, a key word, and Professor Maciel's presentation already pointed out that, for the biofuel production in Brazil and in the world. But in our opinion, it's not only a key word, it's also the solution for that. We are not going to really improve our biofuel production to meet our NDC, even going further of what we have proposed in that NDC, if we don't use integrations. And let's understand what integrations are. If we define 3 axes for the integration, the first axis will be the integration of production chains. And we are presenting only 2 examples of this integration of production chains. Of course, we have integration with food chains. We have integrate with other food chains because we had pointed out the sugarcane livestock integration. And it's clear that in Brazil, the Brazilian livestock production has low productivity due to the extensive management that is the characteristic of this production chain. So the idea here is that if we integrate these 2 chains, the biorefinery chain with mainly in this moment the production of ethanol and the livestock production, we can improve the land use in Brazil because we can use the land that can be set aside by the livestock chain for biorefinery production, and the biorefinery will produce byproducts that can be used to intensify the livestock chain, production chain. The other important integration in this production chain axis is the sugarcane forest. And when we talk about forests, of course, we are not talking about native forests, we are talking about planted forests, and mainly the energy planted forest, not even the forest that is used for pulp and paper, for the pulp and paper industries, although residues of these industries can also be considered in this integration. But it's important to focus that Brazil has an important energy forest of eucalyptus, especially in the central area of the country, that can be used for this integration. The second axis of the integration are the feedstocks. And for feedstocks, we only pointed out 4 examples. Again, sugarcane with an important characteristic. Corn, soybean, and eucalyptus. Corn is a new idea that came out in Brazil to integrate sugarcane with corn in order to extend the operation of the biorefinery based in sugarcane. I ask you to have clear that when I talk about sugarcane, I'm always talking about biorefinery because already the sugarcane is a biorefinery in Brazil. So corn can be used, since corn can be stored, on the contrary of the sugarcane juice that cannot be stored, then we can produce ethanol all year round and not only during 8 months, 7-8 months, how is done today in Brazil. This means that we have to analyze the possibility, and I'm already going a little bit further, looking to the third axis, the biorefinery processes, the fact that we need to use the biomass from the sugarcane to process the corn to produce the ethanol. But of course, we have other ideas to use the biomass, the residue, the bagasse, and the straw of the sugarcane in order to, in the bioenergy scenario. That is to produce more electricity, that is produce second generation ethanol, as we speak a little bit in a few minutes. And finally, also the eucalyptus can be a solution for this problem of needing biomass to produce the energy required by the integration of these feedstocks. Okay, going to the third axis, then we can, let me only go back a little bit to the second. I forgot to mention the soybean. The soybean is important as an alternative to produce soybean in the reform of the sugarcane fields, and with that soybean to produce biodiesel that can be used, for example, in the machinery and in transport of the sugarcane. That's a possibility that should be looked in the integration of these feedstocks. Now, when we look to the biomass process, there are many alternatives normally not evaluated, that's an important point, on the same economical, environmental, logistic basis. That's important, because if we don't do that, and I ask you to have this in mind, when in a few minutes I will talk about the challenges about this integration that I'm talking about. Okay, the first point about the biorefineries that I mentioned here is the first and second generation of sugarcane processing, the integration of the first and second generation. In Brazil, this is, of course, the most obvious integration in this field of production chains. An example of that is the recent developed by the National Biorenewables Laboratory that develop a competitive technology based on a new enzyme cocktail tested in a pilot plant. This development is being disclosed with the support of FAPESP news, and of course, the laboratory is seeking partnership to license this new technology. This is only to show that already examples of this integration are going on. Of course, Professor Maciel talked about plants that are already using second generation, already producing second generation ethanol. Then the second important biochemical, the important process integration is the biochemical and thermochemical routes, focusing in improving yield and environmental impacts of these technology integrations. Professor Maciel already told us about some of these integrations. I would like only to stress out, for example, the possibility of using pyrolysis to densify energetically the straw in the sugarcane field to transport and to use it in the energy production. Of course, if you pyrolyze, you produce bio-oil that can be gasified or can be used as a co-processing, as we'll tell a little bit later. The second possibility is the pyrolysis gasification of second generation residues. The second is only second example. And with that, we can produce and we can improve the advanced biofuel label of our ethanol, because we can produce more advanced fuels for biojet fuels, for green gasoline and diesel. The third alternative that I want to stress here is the co-processing of renewable and fossil fuels in order to produce green gasoline and diesel, biojet, HVO, hydrated vegetable oil fuels. And of course, this co-processing is very important in a transition phase that we are entering this new decade in the world, because Brazil has already entered on it in the last century. But in the world, we are entering now in a transition that we are going from fossil to renewable, as the speakers that antecede me, they pointed out, in order to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And an example of how important is this relation between renewable and fossil fuels is the fact that refineries are being converted to biorefineries already. Okay, As I said, the slide is clear when you have 4 clouds standing around this idea that integration can be the solution, as I try to stress in the explanation of the axis. The first challenge, the first cloud, is the research efforts that are even more important to be done when you think about the interaction. Now we are not looking only to research applied to some feedstocks, but we have to look to the solutions for different feedstocks and integrated different feedstocks. And for that, it's very clear that the partnership between the research institutions is a key factor in order to have that. An example, in the Brazilian Biorenewable National Lab, it focuses on the development of industrial biotechnology platforms. We are not looking to the thermochemical platforms in our development. And of course, in this biotechnology platform, we are looking to enzyme cocktail developed using genetic manipulation, the microbial genetic engineering, biochemical production, light olefins, aromatic others, bioplastic, and Rubens already told you a little bit about that. And of course, this group that looks to the biotechnology processes, they have to integrate, they make partnership with the thermochemical routes if you want to develop really integrated process. Okay, the second cloud that I'm showing here is the public policies. These public policies, for a good example that was already cited by Glaucia, is the Renova Bio policy. That is, Renova Bio will set, actually I'm going very fast because my time is going off, was set, will set annual national carbon reduction targets. These targets will have to be obeyed by the fuel distribution that will have individual targets to meet, and the biofuel production will receive a number of CBIOs, that is the monetary way to measure this improvement, this environmental improvement, depending on the fuel volumes and production efficiencies. Carbon intensive is the focus. And this is hoped that will be an incentive, an important incentive, and is being already an incentive for the production of advanced biofuels. The third cloud is the globalization of the energy sector. I think that I don't want to engage in a controversial discussion at this point, but I think it's fundamental to establish a world biofuel market. And for that, it's important that the fuel market also is globalized, as many other production chains are globalized in the world. For that, I mean that countries that have land, that have conditions to produce bioenergy, will have to be considered as producers of bioenergy for the rest of the world. Finally, the fourth cloud, and I ask to show my second slide, is the sustainability simulation platform. I think somebody forgot to change my slide, please. Well, anyway, I'll talk. Okay, here is the slide. This slide shows. I'm going to only two different aspects to the importance of this platform that is called the virtual sugarcane biorefinery. It's not only for sugarcane, not only biorefinery, but it was the starting of the construction. Is to look to the raw production chain, and also to the impacts in the sustainability impacts, looking to economic, social, and environmental analysis of this impact. I'm sorry that I'm out of time, and I thank you very much for your the audience. And if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Back to Professor Horta, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Bonomi. I am sure that you have convinced us about the essentiality of the integration. It's absolutely crucial to integrate in parallel, in series, in different perspectives, and these boundary conditions that you put is very interesting. Thank you so much. Now you are going to have with us a good friend also, Professor Lee Lindt. He is Distinguished Professor of Engineering and Adjunct Professor of Biology at the Dartmouth College, Consolidated Bioprocessing Team Lead at the U.S. Department of Energy Center for Bioenergy Innovation, Executive Committee Chairman of the Global Sustainable Bioenergy Initiative, and co-founder and Chief Scientific Officer of ENGIE Corporation. He is an expert on utilization of plant biomass for production of energy, covering several domains, including research on fundamental and biotechnological aspects of microbial cellulose utilization. Professor is a partner in different projects with FAPESP, and it's a pleasure to hear from you your perspectives on these new frontiers and opportunities for bioenergy fuel production regarding sustainability aspects. Please, Lee.
Thank you very much, Horta, and it's great to be with you this afternoon. Let me just make sure for a moment that you can hear me okay. Is it
fine? Fine.
Good.
Okay.
I'm speaking to you from 7,000 kilometers away. So, Boa tarde. I'm honored to participate in this webinar, and I thank Glaucia, Horta, Rubens, and other meeting and session organizers for the invitation to do so. It's good to be in digital communication with so many of my Brazilian friends. In my presentation, I'm going to make 4 points about cellulosic biofuels, which I will refer to, as others do, as 2G biofuels. Point 1, there have been important changes in the context for 2G biofuels over the last decade. Number 2, alternative 2G biofuel processing paradigms exist with potential for radically lower costs compared to the technology we have today. Number 3, the newly formed Advanced Second Generation Biofuel Laboratory at the University of Campinas is dedicated to realizing the potential of one such alternative paradigm. And number 4, catalytic reforming of ethanol to hydrocarbons, which Rubens mentioned, has strong potential to bridge the a gap I see between the global biofuel supply and demand. So moving to point 1, the context. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to assume that second generation biofuels are desirable in light of climate change mitigation, rural economic development, and improved sustainability of agricultural landscapes. It's important, however, to acknowledge that key contextual aspects have changed over the last decade, and these include much lower oil prices now and expected for the future. Unlike 10 years ago, electric vehicles are now regarded by most of the world as the leading option for carbon neutral light duty transport. And then third, a 2G biofuel industry based on thermochemical pretreatment and added cellulase enzymes has been slow to launch. The rate of deployment has fallen far short of the expectations of both policymakers and investors. And many formerly active players have left the field. And at the same time, the bar, if you will, for cost competitiveness has become more challenging. One thing that has not changed is that Brazil is uniquely positioned, in my view, to foster and benefit from the emergence of a 2G biofuel industry. Looking forward, realization of the potential of cellulosic biofuels would be accelerated by a renewed and somewhat refocused effort, which I suggest we might call 2G 2.0. One key part of this effort is continued pursuit of deployment, replication, and improvement of technology based on the current processing paradigm involving thermochemical pretreatment and added cellulase. I honor the leadership of commercial players in this endeavor, including Hyzon, Granbio, Poet, and others, as well as organizations and individuals pursuing research advances, such as those recently reported by Mario Murakami and others, colleagues at LNBR, which has been mentioned, Bonomi mentioned that advance. But a second key part of 2G 2.0, and the focus of my comments today, is advancing new processing paradigms with potential for lower cost. Whereas the current processing paradigm is being deployed commercially, new paradigms, by definition, are less fully developed and require research-driven advances followed by pilot work, as suggested by the high beams image on the upper right-hand corner of my slide. We in the biofuels field should learn from the example of batteries, which have progressed from lead acid to nickel cadmium to lithium ion, and yet further new chemistries under development. Digital photography provides a yet more stark example of standing pat with technology. So a full pipeline of promising new technologies is vital for the maturation of the second generation biofuels industry and the bioeconomy more broadly. So moving to my second point, that alternative 2G biofuel processing paradigms exist with potential for radically lower costs compared to the conventional paradigm involving thermochemical pretreatment and added cellulase. The particular paradigm I will discuss by way of illustration, and it's because the one I'm closest or most closely associated with, is only imaginable as a result of new understanding and capability gained over the last 10 years. Specifically, we now know that thermophilic bacteria are decisively more effective at biomass deconstruction than the cellulases of aerobic fungi that have been the focus of the industry thus far. Using these thermophilic anaerobes, simultaneous solubilization of lignocellulose carbohydrate and fermentation of both C5 and C6 sugars can be accomplished without added enzymes. In a process configuration called consolidated bioprocessing, sometimes abbreviated CBP. Application of genetic tools to improve ethanol production in thermophilic anaerobes is newly possible. There were essentially none available 10 years ago. And finally, milling during fermentation, that is co-treatment, is an alternative to thermochemical pretreatment for increasing the accessibility of lignocellulose to biological attack. So production of second generation ethanol via consolidated bioprocessing with co-treatment, or CCBP, avoids the two primary factors responsible for the substantial cost of current technology, thermochemical pretreatment and added enzymes. As we might expect, if we avoid those two key cost factors, CCBP has documented potential for radical cost reductions. For example, an 8-fold reduction in the payback period compared to a base case specified by NREL, which we reported a few years ago in a jointly written paper. It is also the case that CCBP requires laboratory R&D and then piloting to develop into an industrial process. Excuse me, I was getting ahead of myself. If we could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. I assume we'll get there soon. Oh, there we are, beautiful. So the third point, earlier this year, FAPESP gave final approval to a proposal to form the Advanced Second Generation, or A2g Biofuel Laboratory at the University of Campinas, for which I am honored to serve as director. As listed on the slide, this is supported by a Sao Paulo Excellence Chair grant from FAPESP, the Sao Paulo Research Foundation. It is co-hosted at UNICAMP by the Faculty of Chemical Engineering, FEC, and the Center for Molecular Biology and Genetic Engineering, CBMEG. We have a substantial network of partners to which I anticipate additions will be made, including the International Hub for Sustainable Development at UNICAMP, the Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth, the US Department of Energy, Center for Bioenergy Innovation, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the USA, the Stellenbosch Water Institute in South Africa, Enchi Corporation, which is a USA company, and there's very strong interest on behalf of the A2g Lab, and I will say I have personal strong interest in strengthening our already substantial relationships, transforming into partnerships with Brazilian biofuel producers. There are also, excuse me just a second. Yeah, there we go. I also want to mention that involved in the A2g Lab are associated investigators, not only from UNICAMP and Dartmouth, but from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the University of Colorado, and Northeastern University in the US. And that's another circle that we look forward to broadening. And that recruitment of graduate students and postdocs is underway. Not listed on the slide, I'd like to mention to you the objectives of the A2g Lab, and there are 4 of them. The first one is to advance research-driven innovation and enabling scientific understanding, pursuant to testing the hypothesis that CCBP offers a simpler, more robust, and decisively more cost-effective approach to sustainable 2G biofuel production compared to the thermochemical pretreatment fungal cellulase processing paradigm. Number 2, actively publish results from the research described in number 1, with some publications in high impact journals. The third objective is to develop an intellectual community centered at the University of Campinas that becomes a recognized world leader in advanced 2G biofuel research, interacts in mutually beneficial ways with multiple departments and initiatives at UNICAMP, as well as the broader Brazilian and international communities, and contributes to the professional development of participants. And fourth, to advance commercial deployment of CCBP, working in close collaboration with small and large companies from Brazil and abroad. Before leaving the topic of the A2g Lab, I want to acknowledge the contribution and support of the lab's assistant director, Cindelia Azzoni, and UNICAMP professor responsible for the A2g Lab, Adriano Mariano, excuse me. Also from CBMEG, Edie Sartorato and Monica Melo. From FEC, Angela Moraes, Edson Tomas, Everson Miranda, and others. From the senior leadership at UNICAMP, Rector Marcelo Noble, Munir Scaff, and Marco Aurelio Lima. And finally to Brito Cruz for first alerting me to the possibility that I might lead a lab in Brazil. So I have one more topic, and I'd like to address a technology that I'm not directly involved with, but I think has great potential and strategic importance for the biofuels field, catalytic conversion of ethanol to hydrocarbon fuels. My assessment is informed by the observation that there is a mismatch between the fuel molecules that biology can most readily provide and the fuel molecules that the world would most value from biomass. So, elaborating on that, for fundamental reasons we can discuss if desired, ethanol, in my view, will very likely be the lowest cost biologically derived liquid fuel or fuel intermediate, essentially for the indefinite future. There's a lot of evidence that microorganisms are inherently better at making small molecules than large molecules. And yet global interest in biofuels is greatest for the large fuel molecules that are suitable for use in aviation and other heavy-duty applications that are difficult and likely impractical to electrify. They represent about half of the overall transportation energy use, these difficult to electrify applications. Catalytic conversion of ethanol to hydrocarbons has great potential to reconcile this discrepancy. I note that the technology for such conversion is rather mature and can be applied to first or second generation ethanol. And as a team, including 2 Brazilians described in our paper published in PNAS last November, the cost of converting wet ethanol vapor to hydrocarbons today is only slightly higher than the cost of purifying that wet ethanol into anhydrous ethanol, and foreseeably no higher than the cost of purifying wet ethanol in the future. The prospect of producing hydrocarbon fuels from renewable biomass feedstocks for the same cost per gigajoule as ethanol is a potential game changer and could be transformative for the biofuel industry and climate change mitigation. To the best of my knowledge, this is achievable in the near term. So I look forward to the discussion that I think will come now, the Q&A with my colleagues, as well as the audience for the webinar. And once again, thank you, obrigado, for including me in this. And my friend Orta, back to you.
Professor Orta, you are muted. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Lee. It's good to see has this integration that Bonomi just mentioned and can be considered also at institutional and nation level, okay? We can get more synergies and results. It's interesting, this CCBP. I wish that in the forthcoming month we'll have interesting results. We're looking forward to that. So we have now some time, not too much time, but we have some time for some discussion and some debate among us. And we have here some questions, and I will choose one first for Bonomi. I have no the name who is asking, but it's interesting, this question. No, what will happen, Bonomi, if the proposed integration, at least some of them, will not be established either in Brazil or elsewhere in the world? So what could be the implications and logistics and costs? What your remarks about that?
Yeah, I think it's important to remark that it is important when you talk about integration, it's very important that you can evaluate that integration. So if you don't do this integration because you don't evaluate it or because you have negative results, that's okay. The problem is when you don't evaluate, and so you don't understand how important for some regions. We are talking about Brazil, but we could talk about the world. For some region will not use their strength to produce the biofuels because the alternative to integrate, for example, a region with a large livestock production in Brazil can really consider if this integration between the biorefinery and the livestock production is optimized, they can have really good results, economical and environmental results with that production. And if this integration is not done, they are not going to have those results, those positive results.
Interesting, thank you. My colleagues, in order to speed up the processing of questions that are coming, I suggest that all the speakers, if you can, check the chat that you have, maybe evaluating some questions that are coming. I will address to you as we can. So now for Rubens Maciel, I wrap up the 3 questions, and please, they are 3 questions absolutely over this appraisal that you did. No, why are the chemical routes in an earlier stage compared with the biochemical ones? Interesting question, no?
Yeah, that's a good.
Let me maybe the other 2 questions. And what is missing to jet fuel becoming price competitive and go to the market? Another key question. And what your opinion about ethanol as hydrogen carrier for transportation applications? Oh, we have here 3 nice questions for you, please.
Yes, well, let's take as example the first generation ethanol that has a learning curve in the last 40 years, as I mentioned, that increased the productivity by third times, 30 times. So a lot of productivity comes from science and technology, and also from evolutionary engineering. What I mean by that, we have to have thermochemical process running using either syngas or bio-oil in co-processing to start it and to improve the process while it's running. So the first message is we have to put this process to run and to reduce the price to increase the scale up. That's the first point to thermochemical routes to become a reality. I think now with the improvement in first generation and even second generation, the broad use of biomass, you can extend this concept. Secondly, why jet fuel is not coming to that point of utilization now or to be competitive? For instance, the catalytic conversion of ethanol to jet fuel could be one option. And another one is to use one process that's not need the hydrogenation. I think the main point nowadays that it becomes the process a little bit slower to become a reality is the need of hydrogenation that increase a lot the price of the biojet fuel, first point. And secondly, there is no enough pressure on the sector. Now I think that's time to chance. Alternatives we have, including the catalytic conversion of ethanol, as Professor Lilinde mentioned, in this our process. The third question is about energy carrier, using ethanol as energy carrier. I think that's a quite nice solution. So it can be a transition, but you can use fuel cells based on hydrogen that comes from reform in the embedded technology. That's something that's already on the or already in the very advanced, let's say, scientific studies, near to be a technological solution.
Okay, nice. I can inform that in the forthcoming webinar, we'll discuss more focused this opportunity of integration of electrical vehicles with bioenergy using fuel cells. It's interesting. Coming back a little bit to the hydrocarbons production from biomass, Lee, I have a question for you. In fact, two questions. You commented that ethanol is very likely to be the lowest cost liquid fuel molecule for the indefinite future, and that biology is better at making little molecules than big ones. Can you elaborate on this point, please? And I have another one, please. How and when do you see the processing concept you described, CCBP, moving out from the lab into industry? Good questions, Lee. Please open your mic, please.
Okay, yes, very good. So on the first question, you know, I've recently with colleagues done, or actually the colleagues did, to be fair, Costas Marinas and his group at Penn State University, we've looked across the literature at the highest titers and yields that have ever been reported for biotechnological products. And both of them fall off the cliff after about 4 carbons. And without getting into too much detail, you know, membrane integrity is absolutely essential for cells to remain viable. And the more a product looks like a membrane, the more difficult it is to maintain membrane integrity. And if you think about it, fossil fuels were, at least oil, petroleum, was once microbial membranes. So for example, butanol is much more inhibitory to biological process to cells than ethanol, and always will be. And hexanol is more inhibitory than butanol, and always will be. And so in ethanol, you have a molecule that from a thermodynamic point of view has about 95%, if you make it stoichiometrically, of the energy that's in carbohydrate. That's hard to beat. And it's relatively cheap to recover, and it can be produced at high titer and yield. As the molecules get bigger, we're not going to be able to produce them at as high titer. That will increase separation costs, and it will also increase fermenter costs, because especially if you make them from lignocellulose, the reaction time is going to be roughly fixed. And as the concentration goes down, the fermenter investment goes up. So I think ethanol will be the lowest cost liquid fuel for the indefinite future. And it's partly because biology is more comfortable making little molecules than big ones, as I mentioned, because the little molecules look less like a membrane. And to answer the other question more briefly, the how part of getting CCBP out of the lab is the easier part of the question you asked. I think it would be very natural to bring that technology to an operating 1G plant and have a side stream where bagasse was processed, so you were in that environment. I look forward to discussing that with Brazilian producers. The timing, and I have to acknowledge that I and other people have not been very accurate. If you look over the years at forecasts for timing of deployment for second gen, and with that acknowledgement of humility, I can say that I think if things go well, I'd love to see a pilot operation of the kind I discussed at a Brazilian ethanol plant within 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lee. I hope so. that it occurs. Anyway, we have more questions than I expected. In fact, let's speed up this. And we have a question from Luc van der Wielen, a colleague. I don't know if he is in Netherlands or in Ireland, but it's good to have Luc with us. The question is for Bonomi directly. Bonomi addressed the importance of market development. For fossil fuel sector, the platforms that serve all markets of C2, C3, and aromatics, ethanol and lignin derivatives connect also to C2 and aromatic markets after a little chemical bioderivation, such as catalytic dehydration. Can we just move sources from fossil to bio and keep most investment intact? That would allow scaling green technology much quicker and cheaper. What do you, with all oxygen that comes from biomass, if fuels don't contain oxygen? And he mentioned the interest of Europeans on that, and maybe you have some comment about that, Bonomi. It's a complex question.
Yeah, I think so. To have a short
turn off your camera, please.
Okay, to have a short answer for that, I don't think I have a short answer for that. Anyway, I think that what I was mainly talking about market was for fuels. And of course, when you talk about market for fuels, for example, biojet fuels, that's something that they have very strict numbers that they want to achieve with the substitution of the fossil fuel by renewable fuels. I think that for that is very important to understand what we can have a production in one country being spread out to the other countries in the world that don't have the same conditions. For example, produce biojet fuels integrated to sugarcane biorefinery is in our calculations that we have and that we have published is a very interesting possibility to produce the renewable biofuels, biojet fuels, and for that you need the world needs to decide to globalize this production chain. Okay.
Okay.
That was a very quick answer of some points of Luke's question. I would be glad to discuss the complete question in more details through email or other ways.
Okay, Bonomi. I suggest you enter in direct contact with Luke and have a long discussion with him. It's a good topic. Okay,
yeah, you're right.
Friends, it's nice to see that we have a good participation. We are rewarded with that. It's good for BIOEN to see that people are interested, are involved on this. It's fantastic deal with an energy that our final energy, a couple of months ago was not more than solar radiation, water, and CO2. And we converted that in biomass and processed that and goes to the final use. It's nice. This almost poetic conception of bioenergy requires, it's becoming more and more clear to us, an integrated approach. and DOE are using the co-optima approach to simultaneous optimization of biofuel production and biofuels utilization in mobility. But we could, using the large variety that we have just discussed, to consider from the biomass production until fire utilization, consider the integration of the routes as we just discussed here. I have just one question more. We have a problem with time. So I have interesting questions that summarize some points that we were discussing here. I will ask this question for our three speakers, asking for their comments about and their final remarks, please. So the question came from Swapna, from India. That will be, what will be the efficient technology for production of large molecules apart from the microorganisms? So it's a quite general question, but deserves some comment from you. It's interesting from our audience. Please, let's start with our first speaker, Rubens, then Bonomi, then Lee, please.
Okay, thanks very much. That's a quite nice question. I will be very quick with the answer. When you do about genetic engineering to do GMO, people usually talk about to investigate and change the machinery cellular inside the cells, but they don't talk about the membrane. So it looks like that you are built up a piano inside a room with a small door. So I don't think that, so the good idea is in fact to use small molecules like ethanol as a feedstock to larger one. Once the productivity and the cost of ethanol is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and you are increasing time more the productivity and the improving the process in all these stages. And then to be quicker in the answer, I think the addition reactions with the new catalysts in the microstructure new catalyst, you can do additional reactions. So that means looks like the jet fuel molecules of our diesel applications that you can add several ethanol molecules in a cheaper way. And once you have it, ethanol in a very efficient way of production nowadays. That's my question, my answer to the question.
Thank you. Bonomi.
Okay, yeah, I'll be very short. I think that maybe I turn off my camera again. Maybe the best solution is to, Lee already said that, and I want to stress what he said, is to produce the small molecules microbiologic in a biological way, and then to go to catalytic chemical synthesis to produce the larger molecules that you are looking for, depending on your product or on your field.
Okay.
Back to you, Horta.
Okay. Thank you, Bonomi. Please, Lee, something to add?
Well, I agree with both of my colleagues. There are distinguished colleagues elsewhere that I think, although there are people that talk about making jet fuel, for example, directly by a microorganism, it is my opinion that it's going to be more promising to let biology do what it does easily, which is to make the small molecules and then let industrial chemistry take over. That view seems to be shared amongst the three of us and was expressed by both of my colleagues. The only thing I would add is that in the realm of the catalytic chemistry, one way to reduce literally the carbon, that is in terms of oxidation and reduction, one way to make ethanol look more like a hydrocarbon, in addition to increasing the chain length, is to add hydrogen. And that intends to involve multiple steps, and then you need to get the hydrogen from somewhere. There are also chemistries, industrial chemistries, that essentially involve dehydration. So they remove the oxygen by removing H2O. And I think that has potential to be done in fewer steps and may ultimately be less expensive. But time will tell. But but it seems that there's consensus amongst this small but elite group in terms of Bonomi and Hubens that making a small molecule biologically and then upgrading it is promising. And again, I've visited a pilot plant that has this operating. And one of the things that's really different about industrial vapor phase heterogeneous catalysis, they're very comfortable doing 1,000 or 10,000 fold scale-ups, which is not true in biological processing. And I'm told by industrial representatives, and I have no stock in these companies, that they're ready for the next step to be a commercial facility. And I think that might be a very exciting thing to do in Brazil, but maybe some of us want to talk about that offline. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. Please, Bodon.
Can I only add one thing?
Yes,
I would like only to say that it is also necessary to consider the thermochemical routes to produce the large molecules, maybe starting with the small molecules when you look to gasification, even smaller than the ethanol, and then go to large synthesis processes.
Okay.
Process to produce larger molecules. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. It's a good topic to discuss more in another opportunity. I consider that from the thermodynamic point of view, if nature prepare large molecules, lipids, cellulose, and it's a cost to destroy that, to process and rebuild again a large molecule. So I'd like to see that from this point of view, but it's for another opportunity. It's interesting to have you with us. Thank you so much. Glaucia, you are here with us. If you want to make some remark, it's your opportunity now. And you have also Luis Cassinelli, and in my background, the total support from Heitor Cantarella that helped me managing this crazy amount of questions and things here. But I think that in order to follow our timetable, I should close again, thanking for the support of FAPESP team in communication, that we had a problem just in the last minutes, and we can solve that. And it was they were able to solve this, and we have this webinar very well conducted by our three speakers. I don't know, can I close now?
Yes, please. It was a very, very profitable afternoon in Brazil. Thank you all. I learned a lot.
Okay. So thank you so much and have a nice day until the next opportunity.
Thank you.